For more on all this, pleased to be joined by one of those mayoral candidates. He is former CPS Superintendent Paul Vallas. Paul, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Paul Vallas 2023, by the way, is the website, Paul Vallas 2023. So your response to Brandon Johnson, he accused you of being a defunder. Can't let that stand.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I think he was referring to me as defunding Chicago Public Schools. I'm still trying to figure that out since,
Right.
if I recall, I left the schools with about $1 billion in cash balances, and I think we operated under the property tax cap virtually every year. I also pointed out that when we left the district with 125,000 more students than it has currently. And incidentally, it's interesting, and Amy can relate to this. We were in Steinmetz High School. Steinmetz High School is one of the, I think, 16 high schools we put international baccalaureate programs. And of course, Amundsen, where your child graduated as a valedictorian, was certainly a beneficiary of those great programs.
Oh, yeah, because the selective enrollment process is it's impossible. I mean, it's harder to get into a selective enrollment high school than an Ivy League college. But that's
so what we did, Dan, was we put magnet programs in neighborhood schools. So this idea that instead of simply having the select enrollment magnet schools, why don't we magnetize the neighborhood schools? And the IB programs were phenomenally successful. We put in Taft, we put in Curry, Amundsen, Sen, and of course Steinmetz. We also put the military academy in Steinmetz. And while Steinmetz has not enjoyed perhaps the success that Taft has enjoyed, it's certainly a far better school than it was before those programs were put in.
But of course, the global answer is more competition in that system than currently exists. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I've always been a strong advocate of, obviously, public school choice, but also a big supporter of the scholarship program. And of course, the scholarship program that now the governor supports. So at the end of the day, more choice is certainly better. And the district during our period, during our tenure, was better off for it. In fact, what Choice did during those years was the district has only seen enrollment increase in 8 years since 1979 when enrollment peaked. And in 6 of those years, in fact, 6 straight years, were the years that Gary Chico and I were running the school. So I think our expanded high-quality school choice options made the district a lot more attractive.
Well, it's not very attractive today, and so if you're running the schools after April, the question is what can be done, if anything, to address all of the horrors that are going on in that school system, educationally, criminally, and financially. And, of course, criminally and financially, I'm referring to that OIG report, which I don't believe came up as an issue in last night's mayoral forum again, but the allegations of widespread sexual abuse of students and perhaps a multi-billion-dollar financial fraud per the average daily attendance reports.
Well, look, I think you have to do the following things. As you know, when you had the sex scandal revelations about that were revealed in 4 or 5 years ago, they set up the Inspector General, and they gave the Inspector General the resources and the capacity to monitor complaints. Now the question is, are those complaints going to be processed, and what's going to be the consequences? When I ran the Chicago Public Schools, we actually embedded DCFS within the department, and obviously all complaints were run through really the Chicago Police Department and DCFS. So if we had accusations, now it was a more primitive time because you didn't have obviously social media and the internet, and obviously a lot of the predatory activities were being done over the internet. Of course, you didn't have that then. But the bottom line is, the question is now, how is the system going to work in terms of processing the complaints? But let me speak to the issue of what needs to be done at the schools. And I'm going to have a press conference tomorrow to talk about this. Right now, that system needs to be broken up and decentralized. Right? They're spending $30,000 a kid, and only about 60% of that money is actually finding its way into the local classroom instruction. And you really have to radically decentralize the system so the money finds its way to the local schools. I think the second thing is those campuses have got to be open 24. They've got to be open through the dinner hour on the weekends over the summer, and you've really got to bring the park district and community-based organizations, faith-based organizations into the schools so that the kids have a safe, secure place to go. That's really what we did in the 90s when the murder rate in Chicago was actually approaching 1,000. I think the third thing to do is to introduce work study into the high school curriculum. There's no reason why city agencies, city departments, the unions, contractors cannot create work study jobs for these kids. So instead of having kids take irrelevant electives, kids can be involved in work study. The fourth thing is they've got to expand the alternative schools program. They could create a series of alternative charter schools to capture these 18 to 25-year-olds that have simply left the system. And in fifth, they've got to expand parental choice. They've got to give parents more options because, unfortunately, many parents, their children are literally held hostage in schools based on their income limitations and obviously based on where they live.
Well, those are all worthy ideas, but so I'm not dismissing them. I'm embracing them by and large. But going back, if I was speak for myself, if I was superintendent or if I was mayor, I would say, do not send your kids to school until we get this situation figured out with respect to this kid's safety. Because when you have hundreds upon hundreds of complaints, and there may be a process for it, and there may be people bearing it as long as nobody draws attention to it, you have to have schools that says we are going to talk about this. We are going to bring things out of the shadows and into the light, so people can have confidence that their kids are safe. They're not being preyed upon when they're at school, for God's sakes. And the lack of dialogue about this, the lack of people pointing to this and saying this shall stop, the process arguments. Yes, you have to have a process for adjudication of claims, but you also have to put pressure on Kim Fox to prosecute. You also have to put pressure on the teachers union to not defend terrible teachers. You need to put pressure on the administrators to root this stuff out and these people out. And I don't see that happening. I don't hear it happening.
Well, look, all I know is no one has ever accused me of being a wallflower on accountability. No one has ever accused me of being unwilling to take on the teacher unions. No one has ever accused me of not being a strong advocate for expanding quality educational choices. That's one of the reasons that I'm running for mayor. And when you have these public forums where the questions are selected by the individual stations, whether it's WGN or whatever, and you have sometimes 90 seconds, or in another public forum, you have 45 seconds to answer questions, it doesn't give you a lot of time. I mean, yesterday, we weren't even permitted to make introductory remarks, or for that matter, closing remarks. But I endeavor to attend every forum. You should look in on my press conference tomorrow, and where I'll be surrounded by a sea of educators who have worked with me in 4 different districts, including New Orleans, where I created the country's where I created a school system, the only school system in the country where parents can pick any school that they want to send their kids to. And I like to think that one of the reasons I'm running for mayor is to address the very issues that you've been articulating on the radio.
All right, let's move on. 5,000 asylum seekers have come to Chicago, and Mayor Lightfoot wants to use the empty school in Woodlawn. Would you, if you were mayor, would you be doing the same thing?
No, absolutely not. First of all, there's a process for handling people who come to the city. Again, I'm going to harken back to the 1990s when we were running the schools, and we had many students coming to this, we had many children coming to our school system who may have had questionable immigration status, but there was a process for handling them. We would admit them to the schools. We would connect them with immigration and naturalization. There was a process. We simply wouldn't open a school and put everybody in a single school in the neighborhood that you didn't even consult prior to the decision to locate them.
Well, what would you do with them? Because she says she's busting at the seam. There's nowhere else to put these people.
Well, first of all, you don't bait people, as she did. But you don't bait people and then not be prepared for it. There are, 77 neighborhoods in Chicago. There's opportunities for individuals to be dispersed among those neighborhoods, not simply located in a single school. Clearly, she decided to grandstand on this, and then she wasn't prepared for the consequences. So all you're doing is dividing the community, and I like to think that you're making things worse, not better. So there is a process for doing. There is a process for handling this. There are natural institutions for processing immigrants who come here who are obviously looking for schooling, and not only that, but also looking for housing without just suddenly taking a school in the middle of a community without any prior notification and spending a ton of money renovating it, and basically saying this is going to be our immigration center. So I think all in all, it's been badly handled.
Is it the city's responsibility in the first place?
Well, look, my position is if people come to the city, there are institutions in place to manage that, to manage immigrants who are coming in. My position with the Chicago Public Schools was I was going to take children no matter what. I was going to check their immigration status. I was going to provide them with educational services, and then I was going to link their families with immigration and nationalization, or for that matter, the CHA if there was a need of housing. There's like thousands of vacant CHA units available. And then there were community-based. Look, we just had an infusion of refugees from Afghanistan, and they were dispersed among a number of neighborhoods on the north and northwest sides. I remember I went to some of the gatherings where they were trying to get them, they were trying to get them clothing, and there were these community-based organizations were trying to find places where they could stay, and they were kind of dispersing them within the community. So there's a process to do this together, and certainly she was unprepared for the response to her rhetoric.
Yesterday, Lori Lightfoot said what she always says. I hear a lot of criticism, but I don't hear any solutions when it comes to public safety, and many of the things that are being proposed by other candidates she's already doing. And last year 1,000 cops left the force. About 300 are not retiring, but they're just leaving to go to other police agencies every year, according to one police lieutenant who's a friend of ours. So what do you do to undo what she has done and get police back on the force and proper experienced police that know how to do police work?
So what you do, and I've discussed this many times on your show with Amy when I've had the opportunity to co-host, the following. First of all, you have to stop the exodus. And I have confidence that I'll be able to slow the exodus because I helped the police negotiate an 8-year contract, which included all the accountability provisions that the sergeants had in their contract. And that 8-year contract probably prevented 2,000 additional cops from simply retiring because they had not had a contract, a pay increase in 4 years. But what I would do is remove Brown and his leadership team and promote officers from within who have the command and respect of the rank and file. That will improve morale overall almost immediately. Put the officers on a normal schedule and push the work schedule, not abuse them, and then push the officers down to the local police beats so that you have local beat integrity. You need to have cars covering the local police beats. I would also jettison the unarmed, untrained, can't make arrests, private security that they're spending $100 million on in the CTA, and I would replace them with as many as 300 additional police officers. This would allow you to also have police officers on the CTA platforms and at the CTA stations and even riding the trains. Now, the question would be, well, how are you going to fill all those vacancies? If you have new leadership, if you allow the police to be proactive, if you give them a normal schedule, if you push them down to their local beats, so you're not putting them all over the city, you will significantly reduce the exodus, and then it will give you an opportunity to catch up. But would you support things like reducing the paperwork associated with stops and encouraging more stops, maybe even going so far as stop and frisk, so that police are more proactive and not back on their heels like they've been for the last half a dozen years at least? Well, first of all, Chicago has never had stop and frisk. What I would do is what I would do is not penalize police for making arrests, for arresting somebody, for assaulting somebody, for damaging public and private property, for basically violating the public way. I would enforce ordinances, and right now the police are not even being allowed to enforce ordinances. I'm also convinced if you do this, there's a number of things that you could do to increase the ranks right now with veteran officers. There are hundreds of veteran officers who left who will return. They're in other police stations, but and they want to return right now, but she's basically telling them that they can't join the union and they have to go through the police academy again. I would allow them to return with no loss in seniority, and I would also invite retired officers to return, as other mayors have done in other cities. And there are hundreds of police officers, individuals who used to be police officers, who work in the fire department and hundreds in the fire department, for example, who could easily be tapped to work part-time as police officers, in the with the Chicago Police Department in emergencies and things like that to basically fill the need when there's an emergency, to cover special events. So there are things that you can do right now to boost the ranks with seasoned officers. And if you slow the exodus of officers and you have a department that's now attractive to seek employment in, I think you can correct this problem right away. I do want to close by saying when my son returned from Afghanistan, he was a combat medic. He wanted to be a police officer, and he couldn't even get on the list to take the exam because there were like 10,000 people signed up. Now they're literally recruiting police officers off the street or at the airports, and they've abandoned almost all standards for the hiring of new police officers, which is going to create a crisis in the future. So at the end of the day, I've laid out a plan on how to do this, and that plan will be effective. And I'm pretty confident that I could restore public safety in short order once I get elected mayor.
Boil it down for us. A lot of people of a center-right persuasion politically are oscillating between you and Willie Wilson, sort of the only two seemingly somewhat outsider candidates. Why should center-right voters vote for you over Willie?
Well, I like Willie, so I'm never going to, criticize Willie. Willie and I are close friends. We both lost our sons. We both spent a lot of time together. At the end of the day, let me just say why people should vote for me. Willie could explain or can, justify his candidacy on his own. People should vote for me because I think I've always demonstrated my independence, but on public safety, obviously, I believe that there's no more important human right than being safe, and I think the primary responsibility for public safety lies in the mayor's office, and there's no more important public service than providing quality public safety. Secondly, I've always been a strong supporter of expanding educational opportunities and educational options for families. I think that's been demonstrated. And third, there's no one running who has ever managed, with the exception of the mayor, and we know she's done it disastrously, multi-billion-dollar budgets successfully. And I've demonstrated the ability to put more police officers on the street to improve public services while holding the line on property taxes. And I did it both at the city and obviously success in balancing school budgets and expanding quality educational opportunities, while at the same time holding the line on property taxes has also been demonstrated. So the city needs somebody who can tackle this budget and make sure that the city is safe, make sure that the city has quality schools, and make sure that we're keeping the city affordable.
He is Paul Vallas, former CPS superintendent, candidate for mayor of the city of Chicago. February 28th is the election. Early voting has started. More information on Paul Vallas, paulvallas2023.com. Paul, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer, Dan, I don't know if you heard the news. Tom Brady is retiring for good.
And Gisele Bundchen is coming out of retirement to walk the runway again, I hear.
Oh, really?
That's all the scuttlebutt around the water cooler with the ladies talking about the Vanity Fair cover, which one she's going to be on. And we'll get to that. Also, before we talk to Steve Moore at 7:37, we'll take a couple calls if there's reaction to Paul Vallas. Anybody wants to chime in on the mayor's race. But
yes.
So that calls Tom Brady, Gisele Bundchen, and then Steve Moore. Three world-class athletes in a row there. 7:37.
But now let's head into the newsroom.
Thanks for stealing the lead,
Well,
Amy.
do you have the big announcement?
Well
I have
done.
it here on the audio board.
No, that's okay. We don't.
You don't want to hear it?
We've heard this before. I'll be skeptical until he's not throwing a pass at the end of August and early